Hello, I'm Jillian Anable. I'm a Professor of Transport and Energy at the University of Leeds. I'm going to talk to you about how we might reduce carbon from Scotland's transport sector and how we might do that quickly because we have to, and how we might do it fairly because we have to do that as well. The first thing to say is that there really are only two main routes to reducing carbon from the transport sector. The first is to get rid of all the petrol and the diesel in the vehicles that we use. So that's in the cars, in the ferries, in the buses, in the trains, in the lorries, in the vans, all of it. The petrol and diesel, the fossil fuels, has to go. The second way is to reduce the amount of travelling that we do in those vehicles. And the thing is that there's a trade-off between those two routes. So that the quicker we get rid of the petrol and diesel, the less we are going to have to accept that we need to reduce the amount that we are travelling in those vehicles and the amount of freight that's being run around in those vehicles as well. So how might we accelerate the uptake of alternatively fuelled vehicles such as electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles? Well, we're making some progress in that regard. There is an increase slowly in the sale of electric vehicles. But at the same time that that is happening, there's also an increase in the sale of large cars like SUVs, large petrol and diesel cars. And the problem is that if we carry on in the way that we are at the moment, then all the good that's going to come from the sale of electric vehicles over the next decade is actually going to be wiped out by all the sale of petrol and diesel in those larger vehicles. So we have to really keep our eye on the whole market. It's not just about accelerating the uptake of electric vehicles. And the reason for that is that once a car is bought, it's actually in our system for around 15 years. So even though we have a ban on the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles, petrol and diesel vehicles from 2030, even those cars that are sold right up into the late 2020s will still be running around and burning petrol and diesel into the 2040s. So we really have a lot of work to do in the immediate next 10 years. The other thing to say is that, of course, we're not just talking about cars, but also buses and other vehicles. And we're making some progress as well in the uptake of electric buses and hydrogen buses. But they're really expensive compared to their diesel counterparts. So if we want to accelerate those, then we have to accept as taxpayers that we need to pay for it a little bit and subsidise the public transport operators to get them into their fleet. And the final thing to say before we come on to solutions is that there is no such thing as a zero emissions vehicle. So all of these alternatively fuelled vehicles involve lots of resources from the planet to put into the batteries, into the steel, into the plastics. So if we want to really try and put emphasis on this technological set of solutions, then we have to accept that actually there is a whole wide range of environmental impacts that will come along with that at the same time. But what might the particular solutions be to accelerating this? Firstly, we certainly want to make all public sector organisations, the National Health Service, councils, etc., only buying electric vehicles into their fleet from this point onwards. Then we might want to subsidise bus, train and ferry operators to buy these alternatively fuelled vehicles. We might want to carry on giving grants to people, ordinary people and businesses to buy electric vehicles as we are at the moment. We might want to do something around car parking charges so that the better the car, the greener the car, the smaller the car, the less you have to pay for parking. And certainly if you are using a larger petrol and diesel car, then wherever you park it, you need to pay to do so. We may want to ban those large cars from sale a lot earlier than 2030. If we don't do that, we might want to heavily tax them so that they are disincentivised. And finally, we might want to have a scrappage scheme so that those people that have a petrol and a diesel car might hand that in and in exchange get subsidised public transport or an electric bike or a conventional bike or something along those lines. But we do need to know that even if we were to now go really, really quickly and get these alternatively fuelled vehicles into the fleet, we have left it too late to be able to rely on that alone. Whatever we do, however quickly we go with that, we've got to accept that we have also got to reduce the amount of personal and freight travel in the system. So a few things to know about that. Walking and cycling is often put forward as the way in which we need to get people to use their cars less. Certainly, it's very, very important. A large proportion of car journeys are less than 2 miles or less than 5 miles and could be walked and cycled. And that's also very healthy for us to do that as well. The problem is that we can only, there is a limit to the amount of carbon that can be saved by doing that, because the most carbon is emitted from car journeys of longer length. And those journeys are really impossible to switch to walking and cycling. And so often public transport is hard for some of these longer journeys as well. So walking and cycling has a limited, important but limited role to play. We can think about this in terms of the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, they cycle a huge amount more than we do in Scotland. But actually, the average per capita carbon footprint from travelling in the Netherlands is just as high as it is in Scotland. And that's because they do lots of cycling, but they also do lots of car travelling and lots of long distance car travelling as well, because that's not limited in any way. So they do more of everything. So we have to swap some of these longer distance journeys to become shorter distance journeys. We can switch a certain amount of them, say, to the railways, but actually one of the other solutions is to think about how we can make things more attractive closer to home, shorter distances to work, shorter distances for going shopping and for leisure, etc. It's difficult, but we need to do that as well. The same applies to freight. We need to think about how we reduce the amount of freight miles, as we call it, how many miles our goods travel that we are buying, and seeing if we can make and buy things closer to home. It's a big part of the solution. Finally, the other thing we need to think about is the fact that cars stay stationary for most of their time. So about 23 hours out of every 24, they are just parked. And when they are moving, there's often only one person in them. That's a lot of empty car seats and fresh air that's being driven around using fossil fuels, and a really inefficient way of using resources. So we must think about how we can use those cars more sensibly, more intensively through car sharing and lift sharing. So how might we reduce the amount of travel in the system? There are lots and lots of options. Firstly, new houses. We need to stop building them in places where people have no choice but to be car dependent. We need to build them so they are linked in from the start with public transport and they're not in the middle of nowhere. Secondly, existing places all need to have a certain minimum number of shops, post offices, supermarkets right there locally. We've been very bad at that and allowing things to disappear from places, but we need to put them back. Thirdly, we need to make sure that places of certain size have a minimum bus service. So each place has a certain number of buses per hour, all day, every day. And we need to subsidise those buses so that the fares are cheaper than driving plus parking as an individual, but also when travelling as a family. We need to continue to give grants out for the purchase of electric bicycles. Scotland does that already. It needs to continue to do that. And we need to build cycle paths that are over longer distances and joining up places rather than just focused on the centre of urban areas. We need to ban lorries from the centre of towns because people are less likely to walk and cycle when there are heavy lorries running about. And in order to do that, those lorries need to be able to have dedicated places to transfer their goods onto smaller vehicles at the edge of towns, onto vans and onto, say, cargo bikes as well. We need to charge for car parking in out-of-town retail developments in order to regenerate the high street, redress the balance, and parking charges also need to be applied to larger vehicles in particular, wherever they are parked, and be more favourable, those parking charges, for the greener vehicles and maybe the smaller vehicles. And we really can't build any more roads. We can't do that in order and meet our climate targets. And also we may need to close roads in the centre of cities and give them over to bus use, to walking and cycling. And then finally, we need to introduce road pricing so that the use of certain vehicles on certain roads at certain times costs more than for other vehicles on certain roads at certain times. We can adjust the other taxes that are on cars, maybe take them away completely, so that in some cases it may actually work out cheaper for people in an on-demand charging type road pricing system than it is at the moment. So can we do all of this fairly? Well, we need a combination of both carrots and of sticks. All the evidence from around the world shows that it's not good enough just to make the alternatives to the car more attractive. We have to also make car use less attractive, more expensive, and often a bit more difficult to use. But in order to be fair, you really do have to have the carrots in place before you can start wielding the sticks. Also, no policy needs to be all or nothing. Reducing car use doesn't mean no cars at all and banning cars and people necessarily even giving up their cars completely. So it's not about jumping to that extreme position. And every pricing strategy can have exemptions for low incomes or at certain places at certain times. Every road closure can actually leave special access for certain vehicles. At the moment, 22% of Scottish households don't even have a car, and they've been unfairly disadvantaged for a very long time now as we've reoriented our society around car use. So we need to redress the balance, particularly for non-car owners. And finally, it's true that electric vehicles at the moment are subsidised and they tend to be taken up by the wealthier sections of society, and that is, on the face of it, unfair. But the fact is that in order to have a market over the longer term and a second-hand market in which everyone has a fair chance of being able to afford an electric vehicle, we need to create that market now. And really, we may have to accept that we may have to subsidise some people in order to get that market up and running. So thank you very much and good luck with your deliberations.